All right, good morning. I think we're ready to go. I'm Dean Miller, President and CEO of Pact, and I want to welcome you this morning to our SaaS Roundtable, a story with Larry Berran from iPipeline. I want to first recognize and thank all of our sponsors. We have just an incredible number of committed organizations to the SaaS space. As you know, we often talk about the strengths of Philadelphia, and certainly healthcare and life sciences are top among those, but equally prominent and growing day by day is the enterprise tech sector, led by some incredible SaaS companies. Again, thank you, AB Bernstein, Fairmount Partners, Boomi, Cigniti, Flexential, Eisner Amper, ORS Partners, SAP, and Troutman Pepper. As we do on a regular basis, we have conversations. Again, here in Zoom today, we look forward as the year progresses to getting back in person, and remind you that all attendees should stay on mute, use the Q&A box to ask questions, and we'll monitor those throughout. The panel will go to about 9:35, and then after the panel in our chat, we'll share the link, which you should already have, to a remote virtual event room where you can have further dialogue with the speakers and others on a face-to-face basis. So with that, let me turn the conversation over to Alan Bourne. Alan is director with Fairmount Partners, helps to lead their tech practice, and is also a member of the board of directors of Pact. Thank you, Alan, for joining and leading this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Dean. It's my pleasure, and we're happy to be here and thrilled to talk to Larry. Just a very quick overview on Fairmount. We are investment bankers. We work with growth stage companies on M&A, later stage capital raising, and then we do buy side for larger companies. So that's what Fairmount is all about. So great. I think with that. We're thrilled, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk to Larry. Larry's CEO of iPipeline, and Larry's going to provide an insider look in terms of how iPipeline was built and lessons learned along the way. So Larry, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Alan. Great to be here, and it's great to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you. So let's kick it off. Can you talk a little bit? Oh, before I do. Sorry, I did want to mention to everybody that there is a Q&A box. I think Dean mentioned this earlier as well. But if you have any questions, so we want this to be an open discussion. The idea is for those folks out there to be able to learn something from Larry and the experiences that iPipeline had. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to answer them, as long as they're webinar appropriate, I should say. So Larry, with that, let's talk a little bit about how iPipeline got started, and maybe your background, and how you got involved with iPipeline.
Sure. So iPipeline was actually founded in 1995. Probably one of the first crops of internet companies way back when, by two gentlemen named Bill Atlee and Kerry Toner. So Bill was actually an insurance agent, and Kerry Toner owned a brokerage general agency. And those two had worked together. And, as the internet was starting to come about, they saw tons of inefficiency within the insurance industry. And effectively, if you were an insurance agent, there was a good chance that you were probably representing multiple companies as opposed to one. And with that, there was lots of paper being FedEx back and forth. And they said, hey, wouldn't this be great if we could actually get a quote online and actually get, our PDF forms online? So it seems very basic, but that was sort of the concept, and their first product was called Mobile Dial a Quote, which you'd actually have a bag phone that you'd go to a diner with, where you could sit down and actually punch somebody's age and some basic information and get a life insurance quote. So that was kind of the early days. I joined in 2002, so the company had gotten to a little bit over $1 million in revenue, had hit a little bit of a plateau, and was having some issues with some cancellations and some other things. And Kerry was the primary guy actually funding it out of his own pocket. And so he was looking to potentially sell the company and get some ideas. And he had some, an independent board that was sort of running it on his behalf. And it was through a guy named Kevin Dowd who introduced me to one of the board members to sort of give him some advice that I wound up getting involved with the company. So they said, we like your advice. Would you like to come join us, and run the business? That's kind of how I got involved. That was back in 2002.
Okay, awesome. And so can you walk us through the early growth of the business? So you talked a little bit about how they had plateaued a little bit prior to you coming on board. Talk about the early growth of the company after you came on board, what that looked like.
Yes, I think the idea that they had was fantastic. I think one of the issues that you have is, if you think about it, we were an aggregator, right? So they had done a great job of building up a platform where you could get online quotes, forms, and product information for a number of the insurance carriers. And they generally were selling that initially to the brokerage general agencies. And then they started to create a product called My Agency that was much more agent focused, but you actually didn't have the ability to transact business. So imagine going to Expedia or Orbitz, where you could sort of see the price of what your vacation would be, but then you'd have to go offline in order to book it, right? That was kind of, where Pipeline was. So we took a step back to figure out, okay, when you look at the entire value chain of insurance, if we can do a great job building out, a system for agents and the distributors to be able to transact electronically, can move up the chain and then begin to sell to insurance companies. That's where a lot of the money is, if you think about it, right? They're the big companies. And so we really decided to double down, going back after the distributor, doing as good as we can to get more carriers on board, which also brought more distributors. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg that we would constantly go after. And then the flagship product, iGo, was started to be developed in 2005 as we got more and more distributors on board with our basic product. And then through a partnership with a company called COS, we launched what's called iGo today, which is our flagship product. And we wound up acquiring them in 2008 as part of the transaction. Yeah.
So your initial go-to-market was you were targeting distributors.
Yeah, they were targeting distributors, and then they started to focus on agents. We decided to go back to the core and double down. And if we can really help the distributors grow their business, everything else, in our mindset, if we could really help bring all that together, we could actually help create a marketplace in insurance, and make a difference, and then sell bigger products to the insurance companies.
Right. And so the idea is a virtuous circle, right? So, the more distributors and the more agents, the more insurance companies, et cetera, and it drives, like I said, a virtuous circle that continues to grow and expand. The more you have on the left, the more you get on the right, the more you get on the left, the more you get on the right.
That's exactly what it is. And it's still happening today. We have a new product called iSolve that we've launched. And, it's again, getting distributors on, getting carriers on, and really help changing the market. I mean, the products that we do bring incredible efficiencies to the customer base. I think consumers want electronic more now than ever.
Yeah.
And it's, when you take a step back, and the fact that some of these things aren't easily available like this in this industry, you scratch your head sometimes, being at 2021.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it takes years and years and years to build, an effective network effect business. So when you think about, the one that everybody thinks about is OpenTable, right? And it took OpenTable 10 years of just selling door to door in San Francisco to build that business where they had enough restaurants that people would come. And that was a consumer model, so it was a little bit different. But it sounds like you all fairly efficiently were able to build your network.
We say fairly efficiently. I mean, it took 7 years to get them to the point where when I had joined, and then, we really started to take off. So without the work that they had laid prior, we would have never been successful when I came on board. So I think, we really just doubled down, and, you had other layers too. So when you think about insurance, it's, today you have certain things that are direct to consumer, right? You can go on Amazon, click a button, it gets sent to you. It's when you look at the value chain, there might be 2 or 3 people involved. With insurance, the layers involved could be like 3, 4, 5, 8, depending on the number of sub distributors. If you're buying it through a financial institution, there's a good chance you have your financial advisor, the financial institution that's now involved. They might have a brokerage general agency in the middle, and then dealing with the insurance company. And there could be other parties along the way. And so really, connecting all those people took forever. We're still adding distributors today, although when you look at the total network, We started out in the brokerage general agency group. We then actually started to sell a lot directly to insurance carriers that had their own field force. When you look at like a New York Life or Mass Mutual. And then in 2013, we decided to really try to go after and get get some traction in the financial institution space. And in 2017, the broker dealer and RIA, because we do believe that more insurance is going to be sold through those channels. So really building out that network, that those two were done through acquisition as opposed to, the hard slog of selling one by one.
Yeah.
Calling up on the phone instead of knocking on the door.
Yeah. So that's interesting. What was the pricing model in the early days?
So the pricing model in the early days is we charge generally a flat fee for the distributor. Their agents could use it unlimited, and the carriers were initially free. We have generally turned that where we always believe that people generally need to pay a little bit. I mean, the agents get to use it because they're going to the broker general agency site. But ultimately, if people don't have skin in the game, they're not going to have adoption, at least on the B2B side. But the carrier definitely pays a larger share of that burden. Most of the products that we've had on the distributor side, especially for the smaller mom and pops, those prices have been relatively flat for a number of years. And have continued that way through the pandemic. So,
and was it a subscription or SaaS model? When did iPipeline become a SaaS?
Well, we were called ASP back in the day, right?
Back in the day,
that's SaaS. So it's actually been a SaaS model since day one.
Okay. And
a subscription model since day one. So we've never had to go through the valley of death of a software company that sold desktop software that, by license and had to be converted.
Right.
I'm very fortunate. And I think Bill and Kerry, when they started the company, were onto something new and I was able to pick up on that. So that worked great.
That's great. So you raised your Series A, I think in 2008. So a couple of years after you came on board. What was that process like?
Oh, painful. We started to think about it in 2006, and a lot of the work began in 2007. And originally we had one of the firms had given us a term sheet, and then they decided they wanted to partner with New Spring Capital. And as we were going through it, I think their investment philosophy was we want to grow top line really fast, and it's okay if we lose money or a lot of money. And New Spring generally wants good growth, but also really wants to protect its downside. So, we actually had the deal fell apart 3 days before Christmas of 2007. And I actually went back to Mike DiPiano. I think it was like January 2nd. It was a snowstorm. And I sat down with him. I said, instead of losing $6 million the first year, what if we made 3, but our growth rate would be low double digits, not, really high double digits. And he said, I'm all ears. And I walked him through a new plan that we had. And he said, I can't fund the full thing myself because of the size, because we were not only raising money, for some working capital, some of those types of things, but also to go acquire a business that was our partner, COS, on the IGO, flagship product. And they had a cash cow business, which is called an insurance illustration. So if you think about it, if you buy a whole life or permanent life product, you typically need 40 pages of disclosures that the government requires. And it's a product that does that. It's a slow grower, single digits, but it provides cash flow. And so the one company wanted to sort of not buy that piece of the business, just the electronic application. And I kind of looked at it and said, look, I'd rather own that, because if the electronic application takes longer to take off, at least we have cash, and cash provides you optionality. And Mike kind of agreed with that. And actually, he wholeheartedly agreed with that. And so we went out and found Fidelity Ventures as a partner. And through that process, we wound up closing in June of 2008. But as part of it, Fidelity had said, hey, we'd prefer that a CEO that's done acquisitions and taken companies public before actually run the business. Larry, would you be willing to step back? So I had some discussions with Mike on that. And I said, I'm happy to do that. I really believe in what we're doing. I think we have a great business. My only criteria is that whoever's replacing me needs to be a hell of a lot better than me and has needed to win before, right? Because if I can't learn, then you're just replacing me with somebody else that has a different company name. So I probably interviewed about 50 people for my position, while also trying to keep the acquisition on the line and bring the financing together. And met Tim Wallace probably around April or May of 2008, a couple months before the deal closed. He helped them do some, who I liked a lot. And I was like, this guy to me was somebody who's been highly successful in a number of areas. I knew he wouldn't be worrying about looking over his back about somebody like myself, and I could learn from him. And so I partnered with Tim, and he joined probably about 3 weeks after the deal closed. And, we took it far from there.
That's great. So you brought on a new CEO. So talk to me about how you went about filling out the rest of the team. Was the rest of the team already filled out when you brought in Tim, or did you really have to implement a team that would that was scalable and that would allow the business to grow with that team? How did you all think about that in those days?
Yeah, I mean, we it's kind of interesting. Today I get to work on the business. Back then, you were in the business, and we had to worry about making payroll. I mean, it was there's some of the stories we'll tell about just trying to raise the money. We decided at one point, we were charging people's credit cards on the first of the month. We actually moved that back 4 days to be able to make one of the payrolls, right? Just so that the cash would clear. When you're an entrepreneur trying to figure out how to make things work, like we didn't have unlimited funding, it was very bootstrapped. And even when we were raising money in 2007, Doug Patilla from Edison Ventures was coming out to meet with us. And if you'd seen our offices, I mean, we had plastic tables in some of the rooms. It wasn't the best furniture. But what we learned is, if we make a joke about it up front, people don't really talk about it and think about it as much. We just talk about how every dollar goes back into the business. And literally we had the cleaning person, we couldn't pay her, so she decided not to clean. You had just some of these things. So Bill and I were cleaning the office before they came out. So just some of the stories that you have to go through as an entrepreneur to make it through. And, and you look at our success today, back then it was really stressful, right? Me and him are, cleaning the toilets, emptying the trash, trying to make the place look great before, investors come in. And really had a strong belief in what we were doing, and we're fortunate that it played out.
That's great, and I think any entrepreneur on this on this program has been there. I when I was at a startup, I went and bought a bunch of desks from Home Depot and put them together myself. I had to pay phone bills with my personal credit card because our phone got shut off. I mean, it is, but that you do what you got to do to make it. So we have a question in the chat box, Larry, that I want to hit, and I think the right way to think about it is maybe from two different directions. So the question is, what was the moat in your solution that allowed you to be the dominant company building the network versus some other company coming in with a similar competitive product building a similar network? And so maybe to think about that question is as you were building it, what made you all different that allowed you to do it? And then, so there's the moat at the time, and then what have you all done to maintain that moat over the years?
So sure. So I think as I get into that, the other question you would ask also was, do we build out the team or start? But with that, there was a couple key players, Bill Atlee, who was the one founder, Brian Seidman, who actually we hired as our CFO, and who actually left us as CTO and is one of the most sought after CTOs in the Philadelphia area. That was kind of an interesting story. And then Bill Hunter, who was one of the sales guys. And so we had to, so the team that core was actually through all these transactions. And after the sale to Roper, Brian Seidman wound up leaving. He's president of another company today. But the other areas we actually had to fill out. We didn't have a lot of money, so we had to, go out and find some of those people. But when you take a step back and you look at the competitive moat, so we had a competitor called Lifelink that did something very similar to us, right? So it was us, a company called Lifelink, and a company called BISG. And so BISG was really small. They were the ones that when I was joining, I think we lost 10 customers the first week I joined. And I was like, I'm probably not cut out for this business. But ultimately, they were going after sort of the larger distributors that really wanted, the tech people wanted to control some of the technology, where we were generally selling into smaller companies where the principals were generally buying it. And then Lifelink had a similar product to ours, except they also had a product to handle the permanent side. So we would handle the term life insurance, and they would handle the more complex stuff, from that standpoint. But they also had things that competed with us, and they would go into the higher level of these marketing groups and sell and sort of get a license to hunt. and because they were endorsed, they were generally the ones being bought. So I talked about some of the distributor erosion that we had when I first joined, and we decided to double back down in that area. And, we were very tactical about how we looked at each one of these marketing organizations, and we decided that we were going to be better salespeople. And, we got our salespeople in a room, we talked about what their vision was for, what they wanted for their lives, get them excited about thinking. I mean, most of them at the time are making $35,000 to $50,000 a year. And we all asked them, what would you guys think about making 100,000? And, it's just, it's idea creation when you really take a step back and you put something out there and you figure out the steps that you need to do it. So we literally got them around the table and we decided to work backwards. I think we had like 3 guys at the time. And within 2 years, they were making, the one guy was making almost 100 grand, but it was very tactical and going after where the marketing organization may have endorsed LifeLink. We became really good at getting good relationships with all the individual distributors within that marketing organization, to the point that then the organization actually had to endorse us as well because so many of their users were using it. So there's a lot of, and what I didn't mention is Kerry Toner had owned a brokerage general agency. So there's actually a lot of interesting aspects in that some of the other broker general agencies didn't want to use us because they thought, he was competitive, even though he was out of the business.
Right.
I really didn't even know him that well, and I have people accusing me of being his right hand. I'm like, we're not trying to start a brokerage general agency. I'm trying to build a software company.
Right.
And so we had some of those things that we had to fight against as well.
That's interesting. So your competitor went into the marketing organizations and you guys created grassroots demand pull that forced the marketing organizations to say, okay, well, this is actually the solution everybody seems to want.
Yeah, I mean, it was not easy. I mean, it took years
Yeah.
to go and do that. And, going to a lot of, we'd have 3 or 4 people showing up at these meetings where our competitor might have one and it might have been a product person as opposed to us bringing salespeople.
Right. That's interesting. And was just from a product standpoint, was your product better than the competitor's product, or was it that you guys just did a better job of selling?
Yeah, they were different, right? So I think in some cases, this whole chicken, the egg, the network effect, I think we did a better job of getting carriers on board. Their pricing model was per transaction, ours was fixed fee.
Yeah.
So, there's some angles there in terms of technology. They probably, because of their permanent product system, the illustration system that I had mentioned that they had, multi-carrier version of that, we did not. They sort of had an automatic in with a lot of people. But I think because our pricing model was also more holistic, I think we had a way better forms engine and product information where they might have done a better job on the quoting side. But, we bundled everything together as one and sold it that way. And so I think the bundle methodology also helped a lot.
You reduced friction. You made it easy for them to buy.
Yeah, no, I think it really, had a good impact.
That's awesome. So talk to me, you did your raise with New Spring in 2008. How many groups participated in that round, by the way?
So it's New Spring and Fidelity Ventures, which is now known as Volition.
Okay.
And so they were the 2 owners, and we completed the acquisition of COS as part of that. So they sort of funded, and then a couple of days later, we closed the COS deal.
Okay, cool. And then how, and by the way, it's unusual for a Series A company to make acquisitions. And so, and particularly today, right? Because people want, venture wants to put money into something that's ROI generating and not have it go back out the business. And so funding an acquisition at the venture level is I would describe it as unusual today. How do you, before we get into what happened between 2008 and 2012, I'd love to get your perspective on, having dealt with venture in 2008, how do you see that changing now, gosh, in 2021, 12, 13 years later?
Yeah, I think, the transaction was highly complex. I mean, if you ask Mike DiPiano, it was probably one of his more complex ones for the age. I mean, I was fortunate. I was able to get the business onto a run rate of 9 million. So if you think about, I joined, we were doing 1 million. We got it up to a run rate of 9. The GAAP revenue was a lot less because of RevRec, but when you look at actual cash flow and billings,
right,
it was there. And when you put the other deal on top of it, it was 17 in total, right? Oh, wow. And it was generating 3 million. So I think Volition and New Spring looked at it and said, okay, we're going to have a business growing 20% a year that's going to be profitable day one, post transaction. We did have to take some cost out, so it was kind of a cleanup thing. They had a lot of admin at the other company, and so we were able to actually put something together that was quite attractive financially. From that, I mean, when you take a look at the revenue, it was probably 2.5 times revenue, which I think what are companies selling at today? 10. It's like insane.
More.
Yeah. Just keeps going up. So I think, and both those companies made fantastic returns on the deal. Part of it was, where it started, but the other piece is that they held on for, I think, almost 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to me about how, I think, and I think you were starting to get into it a little bit, how the business grew between 2008 and 2012 when you did the big deal with TCV.
Yeah, so we wound up actually doing another acquisition of an AMS platform. So if you think about insurance, you have the agents on this side and the carriers here. And we decided we wanted to piece together all the components up to the carrier. And we're going to do that via build versus, or buy, depending on the options out there. And there were three main AMS systems at the time. And we wound up buying a company called Agency Works. And so we continued to sell the EAP product. We were, closing a lot of those deals organically, in 2009 and 2010. And in late 2009, we did the acquisition of the AMS. And the thought process was we could get more of the BGAs to adopt IGO and the ability to actually electronically transact the business if we could actually push all that data into the main ERP system that they use. Right. So if I'm a BGA, I now can get this electronic application fed into the back office system that I use. And the Agency Works product was probably about 30 or 40% of the market right at the time. So, overnight after buying that, we had the ability to integrate that directly from that standpoint. So that made a big difference. And we saw really good growth. I mean, I think within 3 years, the 3-year business plan that we had put in front of New Spring, we were within $36,000 of hitting.
Wow.
So it was that close.
That's amazing.
Now we got there different ways, right? Some of the pricing model change and all that stuff, but literally what we put together, I think was like within $36,000.
That's insane. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's good and lucky, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, sometimes better to be lucky than good.
Without a doubt.
But that's awesome. That's really good. Hey, here's a question from one of the folks on the webinar. So for the leadership team members that have been with you since early days, what are the key characteristics of those team members which have allowed them to scale and continue to lead a much different size and type of company?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been fortunate that, not only is the team, I mean, Bill Atlee was there, but Brian Seidman and Bill Hunter, Bill Hunter was there when I joined as well, but Brian Seidman, who I hired, stayed on through the Roper deal, and then he left shortly thereafter. He's leading another company today. Bill and Bill are still there. And then the team that we brought on when Tim came on board, a number of those people are still with the company as well, although some are starting to retire. So I think we were very fortunate to have people on the entire time. And I think people's willingness to lean in. I mean, if you take a look at even myself, I was willing to take a step back out of running the company to take a number 2 role to make something happen. I really believed in what we were doing. And I think that belief system was very similar with people like Brian Seidman, Bill Hunter, Bill Atlee, Tim, and the rest of the group that wound up joining. We saw what we had and the opportunity there. And we focused externally. And I think businesses tend to, when you start focusing internally, it's when it's the end of the business, right? When people are fighting amongst themselves as opposed to fighting the competition. And I think we've been able to do a good job with people leaning in to want to make a difference, checking their egos generally at the door. Doesn't mean we don't have any egos, but I do think that, everybody is willing to contribute to the greater good. The people are all highly, intellectually curious, I think is another, main factor in that, and they want to make a difference. And I think those factors are probably the biggest drivers that I see.
That's interesting. So finding an entire team that is willing to lean in and do what needs to be done and pull the rope in the same direction is certainly a challenge. And and obviously that's made a difference.
Yeah, I mean, the level of drama, and every organization has drama. I mean, I think the level in our organization over the last 10 years has probably been minimal. And I think that's important, right? I mean, if you don't agree, if you have people that don't agree with what you're doing and they're going to clearly be at logger, it's time for somebody to move on.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, and it's also interesting in an M&A environment, right? So you all have well, how many acquisitions have you all made?
Probably about 13.
Okay, so you made 13 acquisitions. So how do you think about, I mean, when we're advising companies, the biggest challenge with an acquisition is making sure is the integration, right? Is really the hardest thing. And so when you all are thinking about acquisitions, how do you think about that versus organic? And then how do you think about the integration and in particular, making sure that the management team that you acquire has the same characteristics that you just mentioned that cause everybody to pull the rope in the same direction? Because a lot of times when you do a lot of M&A, you get various fiefdoms. Well, this guy was responsible for that, and this guy was responsible for that. But how do you, when you're bringing together 13 different organizations, how do you create cohesion among everyone?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, I think we've been fortunate. I mean, I think with the team that we had, I mean, you had both myself that had led the business and Tim there, right? So we would divide and conquer with some of those types of items. Most of the acquisitions we've done over the years are ones where we've had direct relationships with the founder or owner or have made those. So like the laser app deal that we did in 2017, I walked up to Ed Beggs back in 2005, said, "Hey, do you want to go to dinner tonight?" He said, "You're our competitor." I said, "That doesn't matter. We can go have a beer." Kept up to date with him. He was ready to retire. He said, "Larry, I want to sell to you." Right. And so I got to keep an eye on his business sort of those years and some of those types of things. I think that makes a difference, right? It's not like we're generally out saying, okay, we want to go randomly try to buy this particular thing. We had basically done a lot of work, over the years to really understand the businesses, understand their cultures. We've had some rough patches with some of them, but I think for the most part, we've treated the people pretty well. When we do buy, there's a clear plan. I mean, there have been probably 3 of the acquisitions where we did have to make expense cuts as part of that, and they generally happen day one. You don't like to let those things hang out. But the other ones where they didn't, we would let them know well ahead of time. It's not like we bought them and said, "Hey, surprise, we're doing X, Y, and Z." It was talking about all that stuff up front, because the last thing you want to do is make decisions around stuff, not have the other people that you're, the business you're acquiring on board with it, and then trying to execute that, right? That would be just a disaster. And so I think treating people right, being transparent with them up front, I think is probably one of the most important things that are there. And then communication. And I think if you look at surveys, I mean, we're always going to get dinged on communication. We could talk to people every day and you're still going to, miss some of the things. But I do think it's important that people know that you have an open door. And I think through doing the acquisitions and doing the first ones right, people tend to talk, and the networks that happen within a business, connect a lot faster than you could ever think. And so, if you're an employee, whose business was just acquired, there's a good chance you've reached out to other people at the organization that also had that experience. And, having had a positive experience in the beginning, I think definitely helps.
Yeah, I agree. And having a reputation as a good buyer, and an honest buyer, who treats the employees well. And when you're, when you're an entrepreneur and you're selling your business, you want to make sure that you have it, that you put it in good hands, right? And for you all to have a reputation that, we're good hands for your business is really huge. Makes people want to sell to you.
Yeah, no, and I think that's why we've been a buyer of choice for a lot of people. I mean, even the 2 deals that we closed in September of last year in the middle of the pandemic, the good news is we met those people years ago. The bad news is there was no personal, shaking anybody's hand this time around. It was all done over the phone.
Yeah.
Video. It's kind of.
So I want to get to COVID in a second, but we got a question from one of the attendees. So the question's in 2 parts. So what were the specifics of the deal with TCV in terms of what drove it and why, and what the rationale there was, and what it got you, and then also how is it now? as an entrepreneur, when you came on this business and was doing $1 million in ARR, how is it now working under a large organization? So the TCV one, and then the larger organization.
So it's interesting. So the TCV deal came about in 2012. So New Spring had been in the deal and Volition for roughly 4 years. And then, people like myself have been there for a decade at that point, right? So, you've put all this money in, and when New Spring wound up investing with us, some of the people that were, not only did we do an acquisition, we did a recap, and a lot of people took a little bit of money off the table. I did not. I actually doubled down, drained my 401k and went all in, and all that type of good stuff. They were very concerned about me stepping back from the role as CEO and then taking cash and leaving, right? So I committed that I really believe in this thing. But by the time 2012 came around, valuations were high, maybe nowhere near as high as they are today, but they were high. And you had a lot of people that have put a lot of skin in the game and hadn't seen a return yet. So basically, we sold roughly 30% of the company, and it was nice because from a personal perspective, you're able to pay off all your bills. You didn't have to worry about living paycheck to paycheck, all that type of stuff. And it was very freeing in terms of how you now thought about the business, right? Because up until that point, you're like, you don't want to make any move that you wind up screwing up the business because you could lose all the wealth that you've generated, right? So your mindset really starts to change as you start to have something valuable. And I think being able to take some cash off the table and unlock that made people a lot more relaxed about, okay, I'm willing to take risk again.
Right.
So that was probably, I think, the one thing I learned about the recap is, when all of a sudden you don't have to worry about, living paycheck to paycheck, even though you're doing pretty well, right? It's all locked up. It really changes some of that mindset. And then when Roper acquired us in 2019, we had a number of private equity firms looking at us, and we also had Roper, and it was public. And if we went that route, it would be the last time we were sold. I was highly concerned about leverage and private equity and the amount of debt that they can put on businesses at times. And there was talks of doing up to 9 times leverage. And I'm like, if all else is being equal, I'd rather have 100% cash transaction and not have to worry about debt and all the value that we've built over time that would now be on my shoulders. That was kind of, so I do think you think very differently, right? I mean, if you have that type of wealth locked up, and some of the debt, and they all say how it works, and everything works in Excel till it doesn't, right? I mean, when I worked at Internet Capital Group, there was a big fight with the CFO there and the investment bankers that wanted us to raise more debt and equity, and he just wanted to raise equity, and they wound up raising debt with the equity, and that's what sunk them, right? So when you take a look at some of those things, I had that experience that I had lived through, and I'm like, I am not going through that, and I don't want my name tagged with something like that.
Right.
So we were fortunate to sell to Roper, and they're like a mid-market Berkshire Hathaway. They basically, buy platforms. It's actually like an Internet Capital Group, right? I mean, they're buying vertical technology businesses that they basically leave alone. And, they will work with us on strategy, talent development, like the real good things that you want to build a great business on. But outside of that, it's our strategy and we need to go execute it. And they've been absolutely fantastic.
Oh, that's interesting. So you sort of found the best of both worlds, right? You got a great exit, and you got an exit to a group that'll leave you alone and let you run an entrepreneurial organization like you always have.
But they give you support and make you think about things, right? So it's not like, hey, why is this number? I mean, they're going to ask questions, but it's it's how do you build muscle to build a business for the long term, right? Which is very different. Like prior, it's like, okay, we're going to invest in you. You're going to spend this much over the next 12 to 24 months. You're going to plateau costs, maybe take some out. We're going to sell in year 4 or 5, right? It's a very different mindset, a very different, thought process.
Right. Great. Interesting. So there's about 15, 20 minutes left, and I want to make sure we hit a couple of things. And so I want to understand how iPipeline was impacted by COVID, both in terms of your business and in terms of your employees. How did you manage the business aspect? What was the impact there? What was the impact on your employee base? How did you manage that? And how does that continue? Because I imagine that, I don't know if you guys are back in the office yet. We're not. But I'd love to know sort of how you all have think about that and how you've worked through the last 13, 14 months.
Yeah, so I think March 7th of last year, I was in Vegas at a conference, and everything seemed pretty normal, except there was hand dispensers everywhere to keep your hands clean. And I got back, and I thought testing. It's kind of interesting when I talked about almost hitting our plan to 36,000. We got there, but we didn't get to where that I expected. We had our conference coming up around March 17th, like that week. And I was sitting there one night and I'm thinking in bed, I'm like, you know what, if we're going to get out there, people are going to start testing. And if the test results are bad, we're going to have chaos where people are really concerned about getting stuck in Vegas. And God forbid somebody comes home and gets sick or winds up killing one of their relatives. And so I actually called Roper and I said, hey, listen, I'm going to be canceling our user meeting next week. It's probably going to be $1 million write-off. I think it's the right thing to do. Without batting an eye, they said, we agree with you. We appreciate you letting us know. So that's the thing with Roper. You're in charge of making the decision, but ultimately, I look at them as a partner as well.
Right.
And I think, I told our team, I said, we're canceling it and, we're going to have a write-off and it is what it is. And, I think the employee base was relieved. I mean, there's a lot of people that wanted to go still, right? It's a fun event. We have a lot of customers there. It's, Vegas is always fun to a certain extent. So I think, when we decided, and within the next couple of days, we basically had everybody working from home, and we just said, look, safety is priority number one. And I think the employee base really appreciated that. I think we had a lot of the technologies in place, and we generally did not miss a beat. We did have an office in the UK that they had never worked from home, and everything was desktops, and so that was a little bit more difficult. But overall, everybody was able to accomplish the things that they worked on. So the last 12 months, I think, has generally been good from that standpoint. It's been bad from isolation, loneliness of some of our employees. We've been doing a lot around communities. How do we reach out to people, really on the empathy side, making sure that we're listening, and we've seen some tough situations. I do expect that we will continue to be a lot more flexible as an organization when we do go back. So we're working through some of those things now. It probably will not be till September at the earliest, just from the standpoint, people dealing with kids, childcare. It's funny that people say, the CEO doesn't understand because he doesn't have kids. I'm like, well, I have 2 kids at home. One just got COVID this past Monday, so, we're all dealing with these issues, right? I got, a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old. So I understand that the things that people are going through, I may not have as many difficulties because I have other help, but it's one of the things where we've done our best to try to put ourselves in our own people's shoes. From a business standpoint, given that we are helping electronic transactions, we've seen business generally, on one hand, we've seen insurance companies pull back on the amount of services that they may be doing, or, they're freezing a little bit of some of their plans. On the other hand, we're seeing a lot more of our transactions take off. So, it's kind of a mixed bag, but I do think digitization and going digital is here to stay. One of the funnier questions we're getting from users is, are we still allowed to use this after the pandemic's over? And we're like, we've been trying to get you to use this, the entire time. So we'll see how that winds up working out.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about, that was helpful, by the way, in terms of managing iPipeline and managing a SaaS company? Can you talk a little bit about how you the KPIs that you use and how you measure performance and how you manage to the KPIs, and what you're doing to make sure that iPipeline's on the right track?
Yeah, we have from our Thoma Bravo private equity days, we have a book usually that's this thick every month. But the things that I really want to look at is the amount of new bookings, the ARR growth that's in that, cancellations. They're 2 of the primary metrics, and cash flow. They're generally the things that you want to keep an eye on. I still will look at the check register on a regular basis and still dig down into that level, because if you can follow your cash, you can figure out what's going on in your business. And, they're the types of things. I still approve every hire that the business does. Some Tim Wallace did, as we get bigger, some of that will be delegated a little bit more, but, people need to understand, you have to treat this like it's your own, right? We're not just going to hire somebody because it's in the budget. You're still going to have to answer the questions. So from a cultural perspective, it's, We want to be frugal, but but areas where we need to invest, we will. But so we have, from a mechanics perspective, like weekly reports on revenues, new bookings, pipeline. Is the pipeline growing? That's obviously a leading indicator for bookings, from that standpoint.
Right. How many employees do you all have today?
Roughly 850.
Wow. Okay. So as we sort of come into the last 10 or 15 minutes, I would love to get your thoughts on what sort of advice you would have for an entrepreneur today that's looking to grow their business. Both, and look, you've done it at a variety of different stages. Is there anything, some sort of global advice? And then is there anything that would change if you're talking to somebody that's trying to get to the first 5 million in ARR, or the company that's trying to get to their first 10 million in ARR? Any lessons learned along the way that you'd give to entrepreneurs today?
Yeah, the first 5 to 10 million, the first 1 to 5 and 5 to 10 are the toughest. That's without a doubt. I think we used acquisitions to help really accelerate that, and those things have beneficial, can typically have beneficial additions from that. But I think ultimately, making sure that your product is something that users want, right? So if you build the company from the customer back, and it may be that you're in that business and there's a big need, and that's one of the reasons why you decide to build a business. But really, always talking to customers and getting feedback, I think, is really important. If your sales aren't where they need to be, you may have the best invention ever, but people just may not want it, right? So I think that becomes really important. And then also really trying to look out and understand where other competitors may be. It's just kind of interesting sometimes where people pop up with certain things in our industry that may be mitigated through other things that are going, and you see their business not really go too far too quickly. And then sometimes if you're in government or insurance, it's going to take a long time, right? Certain industries are just risk adverse, or may have crazy procurement methodologies or other things that really could slow you down. So I think it's important, if you're also not selling, to really try to get to the underlying issues of why.
That's a good question. So one of the things, thinking back to what we were talking about earlier, what you were able to do early on was to create demand pull from the sales side. What advice would you give to an entrepreneur who is putting together their first sales organization?
It's hard, right? Because the sales organizations really evolve over time. I mean, the way we sell today and the metrics we look at, and like we have a sales ops organization today, right? If you're a brand new company, you're not going to have something like that. And that's a group that helps take time away so that the head of sales can actually be with his team and selling, as opposed to managing some of those pieces of the business. I think for entrepreneurs that aren't people that sell, I think it can be a little bit more difficult, right? Trying to get the right salesperson is not easy unless you're somebody that naturally does it if you're starting a business. So I think really trying to figure that piece of it out. And it really depends. I mean, I'm coming from the viewpoint of a enterprise type sale, B2B type of sale. It's a lot more difficult. Some of the solutions that we sold in the early day with the chicken and the egg was being sold to a brokerage general agency for $300 a month, right? So it's a very different type of sale versus something you're selling for $300,000 a year or $3 million a year, right? All those sales processes. So I think really understanding how your buyer buys, right? So if it's a nice, simple, business to consumer type thing, it may be a little bit easier. If all of a sudden you have this great thing and you're going to try to take it to a bank, plan on a 9 to 12 month sales cycle, right? I mean, they're generally not going to, they have to have the budget, right? You have to figure out who's buying it. The procurement departments, they may put it out for bid. Even if nothing else exists, such that you have, doesn't mean they're not going to look for it. So I think a lot of times people starting new businesses, especially for larger type of software type solutions, it can take a long time for the buyer to buy. So understanding that cycle, is going to be important. Yeah.
So if you're starting out, what's more important to have, call it two, and it may, the answer maybe it depends, but I'm curious about the cadence. Do you hire salespeople first, or do you hire a higher level head of sales to help build an organization under them? So how do you approach that?
I think it really depends, right? I mean,
Yeah.
part of it's based on how much money you have, all those other factors. And look, you could be the CEO, but you may be a great salesperson. It may make sense for you to do it for yourself for a while, right? I mean, because ultimately, to the extent that you can raise the least amount of money as possible, you dilute yourself less, and you have to balance that against where the market is and how quickly you can take advantage of that market, right? If it's not going to develop as quickly as you think, it may be better to go with a salesperson and yourself as opposed to a sales leader. But at some point, you may have to change that out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think the key here is being flexible, right?
Yeah.
How do you? So one of the things that that a lot of SaaS companies are doing is using channel sales and channel partnerships as opposed to going direct. And the idea being that, if I'm working through channels, I can leverage a big sales organization as opposed to having to build my own. And I may be able to reduce friction through that. There's obviously challenges that goes along with it, like will they really sell it? I'd love to know your thoughts on channel partners as a sales strategy for a startup organization.
We have never really been successful at that, so I'm probably not the best person to give advice on it, or maybe that's advice in and of itself, right? I think ultimately, you need to have a product that is going to excite people and they're going to be able to sell it easily themselves. We have resold Salesforce over time. We've resold Microsoft Dynamics as part of that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
And it really depends. I mean, our solutions are very complex. Now, as with our new end-to-end platform in the US, we are looking at partners that will be implementing it, who will likely also sell it. So we've definitely have had a lot of discussions. And we've actually had a channel partner sell one of our products in France. So it's new for us from that standpoint. So I don't really have the best advice. And if there's anybody out there when we get into the remote session, happy to hear from you all on that.
Yeah. No, that's good. It's a challenge, right? Because salespeople at the end of the day are motivated economically, and they are going to sell what's easy to sell. And if you got a channel partner strategy and you're depending on someone else's sales team, you've got to figure out, is it easy? Is what I'm offering through my channel easy to sell? Are the salespeople going to be economically motivated? And making sure that you've got enough, right? Making sure that you've got enough channels out there that if this one doesn't work, this one will. And then also you can't forget the direct sales, because at the end of the day, you may be the best person to sell it yourself.
Yeah, we had an issue with one of our partners where our product was incorporated into theirs and we were able to resell it. And we're out at a customer, and the salesperson of the third party, they had salespeople too. And all of a sudden we were about to close a deal and they undercut us on price. And I'm thinking they would have made more money just letting us sell the product, at least at the company level. But that salesperson was going to lose out on a commission. And before you know it, the deal was like 20% less, and it just wasn't even worth it from our standpoint.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just some of those dynamics. It just, creates some problems.
Yes, for sure. Well, any last parting words of wisdom for the entrepreneurs in the group that are listening in today?
Well, first of all, thank you for your time today, for your time, Alan and Pax, for having me today. It's been an honor. I think the biggest thing is sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. We'll just go back to that. I mean, we've been very fortunate, but it's not been without luck as well.
Yeah.
And things always take longer than you expect. A lot of times people will overestimate the current period and underestimate the future. I think Bill Gates said that. So I think those are the types of things to keep in mind, the big picture, when you're looking to go take on the world.
Awesome. Well, look, thanks for your time, Larry. Great conversation, and congratulations on the success of iPipeline. I think all of us that are in the Philadelphia area, or point to you with pride and iPipeline, in terms of a company that's done really, really well. So congrats. And also, by the way, not just have done really well, but given back to the Philadelphia area. You've always been very generous with your time in terms of helping entrepreneurs out. And we certainly appreciate it.
Thank you. It's always good to give back.